Donald Trump is watching his global coalition crumble into dust in real time. The night has completely erupted, leaving the former president entirely isolated on the world stage. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni just delivered a shockwave that reverberated through the halls of Washington, announcing a total withdrawal of Italian armed forces from the United States-led adventure in the Middle East. Italy is officially out, refusing any participation in a military conflict against Iran. The diplomatic bleeding does not stop there. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez delivered a blistering public condemnation, directly attacking Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu despite severe threats of retaliation. His message was unapologetic and brutal, stating that one cannot support those who set the entire world on fire and then complain about the smoke caused by that exact fire. Across the continent, European parliaments descended into absolute chaos. A Spanish assembly member stood inside the Madrid parliament delivering a message most global leaders are too terrified to whisper. He explicitly stated that the grieving mothers of 160 dead girls would never thank Donald Trump for the slaughter of their children. The chamber exploded into screams, branding political rivals as pathetic bootlickers of the American president. This unprecedented global backlash unfolded in less than 24 hours. A self-proclaimed ruler of the free world issued a royal decree expecting absolute loyalty from allied nations. He demanded their warships immediately secure the Strait of Hormuz to clean up a mess of his own making. Instead of blind obedience, he was met with the most humiliating diplomatic rejection in modern history. The allies are paralyzed, enraged, and walking away. The sheer arrogance of declaring a total military and economic victory over Iran, only to immediately beg foreign navies to protect vulnerable oil shipments, has shattered any remaining illusions of American supremacy. Fuel prices are skyrocketing, threatening the livelihoods of everyday citizens while a superpower stands completely alone. Hello and welcome to United States News Daily. We are breaking down the exact timeline of this massive diplomatic disaster and explaining exactly what it means for your daily life. If you find this coverage valuable and want to stay ahead of these rapidly unfolding global events, hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell ensures you never miss a critical update from our team. The public communication broadcasted across social media channels by the former president presents a fascinating case study in profound geopolitical cognitive dissonance. The exact phrasing of the statement reveals a staggering disconnect from the tactical reality currently burning across the Middle East. He proclaimed to his millions of followers that the United States of America had beaten and completely decimated Iran militarily, economically, and in every other conceivable way. The absolute certainty embedded in those specific words paints a picture of a flawless, unilateral triumph. It is the language of a conqueror standing atop a vanquished land, declaring the battlefield entirely cleared and the enemy erased from the board. Yet, the digital ink had barely dried before the narrative fractured completely under its own immense weight. Immediately following this grandiose declaration of absolute supremacy, the tone of the message took a bizarre and desperate pivot. The triumphant conqueror suddenly morphed into a frantic petitioner. He stated that the countries of the world receiving oil through the Strait of Hormuz must immediately take care of that critical maritime passage. Furthermore, he offered that the United States would help coordinate this monumental task so that everything goes quickly, smoothly, and well. The contradiction here is absolute and unavoidable. If a hostile nation is utterly defeated, its military capabilities entirely neutralized, and its economy reduced to ash, why would the proclaimed victor urgently demand an international armada to protect commercial shipping routes? A genuinely destroyed adversary poses absolutely no threat to global trade. The immediate, panicky plea for a global coalition exposes the remarkably hollow core of the victory lap. It is a tacit admission that the region is, in fact, incredibly dangerous and highly unstable. The final lines of his public decree ventured into almost utopian delusion. He insisted that this newly demanded maritime coalition should have always been a team effort, and now it will be. He promised that this forced assembly of foreign navies would bring the entire world together toward harmony, security, and everlasting peace. Harmony is a remarkably peculiar word choice for a situation involving targeted missile strikes, exploding urban infrastructure, and mounting civilian casualties. It attempts to frame a volatile military escalation as a unifying global festival. The sudden invocation of everlasting peace echoes the rhetoric of ancient emperors who believed they could bomb a heavily populated region into eternal submission, entirely ignoring the deep, generational resentments that such overwhelming military force inevitably creates. Military strategists and senior defense analysts completely reject the fundamental premise of his initial claim. The concept of obliterating a sovereign nation equipped with a complex, highly decentralized military infrastructure in a matter of days is a tactical impossibility. The armed forces in that specific region have spent decades building extensive subterranean networks, developing asymmetric warfare tactics, and dispersing their drone and missile stockpiles across vast, mountainous terrains. You cannot simply flip a switch and turn off a military apparatus designed specifically to survive massive aerial bombardments. The ongoing barrage of retaliatory strikes, the continued deployment of sophisticated unmanned aerial vehicles, and the highly active missile batteries engaging targets actively prove that the opposition is far from decimated. They are actively fighting back, entirely contradicting the narrative of total submission. The specific request regarding the maritime choke point further unravels the carefully constructed political fiction. This incredibly narrow stretch of water serves as the central artery of the global energy supply. Millions of barrels of crude oil pass through it daily, feeding the massive economic engines of Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Asking foreign nations to park their multi-billion-dollar destroyers and frigates in a highly contested, extremely confined body of water while active hostilities are ongoing is an astronomical demand. It is not a simple request for a peaceful maritime patrol. It is a direct request for Allied sailors to serve as floating human shields for global commerce. The Allied nations recognize this diplomatic trap immediately. They see a political leader desperately trying to outsource the extreme physical and geopolitical risks of a rapidly escalating conflict, while simultaneously hoarding all the domestic political credit for a supposed historic victory. This communication strategy reflects a deeply ingrained belief in highly transactional diplomacy, where loyalty is expected to be absolute and severe consequences are meant to be borne exclusively by others. The expectation that sovereign foreign powers would simply snap to attention, deploying their young men and women into a blazing combat zone simply because a social media post demanded it, shows a profound misunderstanding of modern international alliances. Sovereign nations base their military deployments on their own national security interests, domestic public opinion, and international law, not on the sudden whims or the self-proclaimed achievements of a foreign leader. Every single word in that public declaration has been intensely scrutinized by intelligence agencies across the globe. Allies and adversaries alike are reading between the lines, noting the jarring transition from boasting to begging. The declaration of victory is seen internationally not as a statement of factual military achievement, but as a frantic attempt to control a rapidly deteriorating domestic news cycle. The subsequent plea for international help is universally recognized as a glaring admission that the situation has spiraled entirely out of American control. By trying to project absolute, unquestionable strength while simultaneously requesting a massive international bailout, the message achieved the exact opposite of its intended effect. The world is watching a superpower entangled in a self-created snare, loudly proclaiming its freedom while desperately asking anyone passing by to help cut the ropes. The grand theater of international warfare abruptly crashes into the harsh reality of the local filling station. While politicians debate naval deployments across distant oceans, the average citizen is staring at a rapidly changing digital display. The cost of a single gallon of gasoline has violently surged to $3.70. This sudden spike represents the highest financial burden placed on drivers in nearly 12 months. The immediate consequence of launching missiles halfway across the globe is felt directly in the wallets of families simply trying to commute to work or drop their children off at school. The abstract concept of a foreign conflict has instantly manifested as a tangible, daily tax on every single household. This initial shock at the fuel pump is merely the opening tremor of a massive economic earthquake. The global energy market operates on a razor-thin margin of stability, and fear is the ultimate catalyst for price explosions. As crude oil valuations skyrocket due to the escalating violence, the collateral damage ripples outward with terrifying speed. Aviation fuel, heavily dependent on steady crude supplies, immediately follows the upward trajectory. Consequently, purchasing a plane ticket becomes a luxury reserved for the affluent, severing travel plans and straining the commercial aviation industry. Furthermore, the entire backbone of domestic commerce relies exclusively on diesel-fueled transport. Every truck delivering groceries, medical supplies, and retail goods suddenly costs significantly more to operate. The journey of a simple carton of milk from a rural dairy farm to a processing plant, and finally to a neighborhood grocery store, becomes exponentially more expensive. Retailers, operating on incredibly tight profit margins, have absolutely no choice but to pass these inflated transportation costs directly to the consumer. A localized military strike thousands of miles away triggers an unavoidable wave of inflation, making basic survival more expensive for everyone, regardless of their political affiliation or interest in foreign policy. To understand the severe magnitude of this financial domino effect, one must examine the perilous geography at the center of the storm. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely a body of water. It is the absolute jugular vein of the global industrial economy. Situated strategically between the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian coast, this maritime passage narrows to a width of merely 21 miles at its most constricted point. Within that tight space, only a fraction of the width contains shipping lanes deep enough to safely accommodate massive, heavily loaded supertankers. Through this incredibly tight, highly vulnerable choke point flows roughly 1/5 of the entire world petroleum consumption every single day. Millions upon millions of barrels of liquid energy, destined to power massive manufacturing factories in Asia, heat residential homes across Europe, and fuel transportation networks throughout the Americas, must navigate this perilous corridor. It stands as the single most critical and fragile vulnerability in the international supply chain. When a commander-in-chief initiates hostilities in this specific region, they are actively gambling with the lifeblood of the modern world. The physical environment of the strait, characterized by shallow waters and complex coastlines, provides perfect cover for asymmetric warfare. The opposing forces do not need to sink an entire sophisticated naval fleet to achieve a strategic victory. They simply need to cast enough doubt to terrify global maritime insurance markets. A single deployed sea mine, or even the credible, unverified rumor of a deployed sea mine, is enough to halt commercial shipping entirely. Maritime insurers will immediately revoke coverage or demand astronomical premiums for vessels entering a declared combat zone, effectively blockading the strait without a single cargo ship being physically boarded or attacked. Once the massive tankers stop moving and drop their anchors in safe harbors, the global energy reserve begins to drain instantly. The resulting panic buying on commodity exchanges forces prices into unprecedented territory. Therefore, boasting about unilateral military dominance while simultaneously igniting a massive fire at the front door of the world energy vault demonstrates a catastrophic miscalculation of economic reality. The actual cost of this aggression is not measured solely in defense budget expenditures or deployed munitions, but in the rapid, agonizing depletion of everyday financial security for working-class citizens worldwide. The fallout is inescapable, shifting the burden of war from the battlefield directly to the household budget. The phones in Washington are ringing out into an echoing void. The desperate pleas transmitted across highly encrypted diplomatic channels are meeting a cold, impenetrable wall of silence and polite deflections. A global superpower issued a direct, public summons to its most loyal friends and its most fierce economic competitors, demanding an immediate naval mobilization. The response from the international community is a collective, resounding refusal that reverberates through every corridor of power. Look toward the east, where the hunger for petroleum is most acute and the economic stakes are impossibly high. Japan relies almost entirely on imported energy to keep its massive technological and manufacturing sectors functioning at peak capacity. Under any normal geopolitical circumstance, Tokyo would be the very first capital to offer logistical support to secure its own vital maritime interests. Yet, the Japanese leadership issued a swift public statement citing major, insurmountable hurdles. They effectively told the American administration that deploying their advanced maritime defense forces into an active, unpredictable combat zone initiated by a sudden, unilateral American strike is absolutely off the table. The domestic political fallout in Tokyo would be catastrophic, and their post-war constitution heavily restricts such aggressive, unprovoked deployments. Then consider the strategic calculus of Beijing. China, a massive consumer of crude oil flowing out of the Persian Gulf, completely opposes this reckless military adventure. They view the unfolding chaos not as a shared international crisis to be managed alongside Washington, but as a spectacular, self-inflicted American blunder. Beijing is choosing to watch from a safe, calculated distance. They will absolutely not send a single frigate or destroyer to assist a global rival who just unilaterally detonated the entire regional security architecture. The expectation that adversaries would suddenly transform into obedient maritime security guards exposes a profound, almost childlike misunderstanding of global power dynamics. However, the rejection from traditional European allies carries an even sharper, far more humiliating sting. Just days prior to this frantic international request, there was widespread media speculation that the Royal Navy of the United Kingdom might dispatch an aircraft carrier strike group to the region as a potent show of Allied solidarity. The American response at that specific time was dripping with arrogance and hubris. The administration publicly claimed such British assistance was completely unnecessary because the war was already decisively won and the enemy was entirely vanquished. Now, in a matter of hours, the narrative has violently flipped. The United States is actively begging the British government to send those exact same warships to keep the burning shipping lanes open. The political embarrassment is profound and highly visible. British defense correspondents and military analysts are openly mocking the rapid, desperate pivot from supreme arrogance to begging for lifeline. The official stance from London is that they are merely discussing various options with allies, which is the ultimate diplomatic translation for doing absolutely nothing while waiting for the dust to settle. Across the English Channel, the French government offered a masterclass in passive-aggressive diplomacy. Paris indicated a tentative willingness to potentially participate in a maritime escort mission, but they attached a single, devastating condition to their offer. The French military will only send their sailors into the perilous strait when the active fighting completely subsides. This French condition strikes at the very heart of the American deception. Why are no sovereign nations willing to step forward right now? The answer lies not in political posturing, but in brutal, undeniable military reality. One must look closely at the current tactical actions of the United States Navy itself to understand the sheer hypocrisy of the presidential demand. Despite maintaining a massive, heavily armed flotilla in the surrounding waters, American naval commanders are actively refusing to escort commercial oil tankers through that narrow stretch of water. They know exactly how dangerous the environment truly is. Several massive transport vessels have already been struck by incoming fire. A commercial oil tanker is a slow-moving, highly combustible behemoth. It cannot maneuver defensively, it possesses absolutely no electronic countermeasures, and it is entirely vulnerable to swarming speedboats, submerged contact mines, and continuous aerial bombardment. Military leaders across the globe recognize that providing a naval escort through a highly active shooting gallery is a strategic nightmare. Putting an Allied guided missile destroyer next to a commercial tanker does not make the tanker invisible. It simply provides the enemy with two targets instead of one. Furthermore, defending against asymmetric warfare in a confined geographical space is incredibly difficult. Shore-based anti-ship missiles hidden deep within coastal mountain caves can be deployed and fired in seconds, overwhelming even the most advanced shipborne missile defense systems. This undeniable tactical reality completely shatters the foundational lie broadcasted by the commander-in-chief. He loudly proclaimed to the entire world that he had destroyed 100% of the opposing military capabilities. He sold a fictional narrative of total, absolute pacification to his domestic audience. Yet, the enemy is still actively firing advanced ballistic missiles. They are still launching sophisticated attack drones that darken the sky. They are still coordinating complex, multi-tiered strikes against maritime targets. You simply cannot claim a flawless, bloodless victory while simultaneously begging the rest of the world to help you dodge incoming artillery fire. The global community sees right through the theatrical facade. They recognize that the self-proclaimed leader of the free world has recklessly kicked a massive hornet's nest, and is now demanding that everyone else step in to absorb the venom. The absolute refusal of the international community to participate in this deadly charade leaves the administration completely isolated. They are entirely stripped of their traditional allies, facing the catastrophic, spiraling consequences of a war that was supposed to be over before it even truly began. The shimmering illusion of absolute American power has evaporated overnight, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of a superpower standing entirely alone in the smoldering ashes of its own disastrous foreign policy. The continent of Europe is currently experiencing a political earthquake of unparalleled magnitude, one that is violently tearing the traditional transatlantic alliance apart at the seams. Inside the historic legislative chambers and grand governmental halls across the Atlantic, the carefully maintained diplomatic veneer has completely shattered. Decades of ironclad partnerships and whispered, polite disagreements have been abruptly replaced by raw, unfiltered, and highly public outrage. The absolute breaking point was reached not behind closed doors in classified briefings, but under the blazing lights of public parliamentary sessions, broadcast live for the entire planet to witness the unraveling of an empire. The epicenter of this initial shockwave originated in Rome. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni stepped to the podium and delivered a definitive, crippling strike against the American military adventure. Her public declaration was not a mere expression of diplomatic concern or a request for a strategic pause. It was a total, immediate, and uncompromising severing of military participation. The Italian armed forces, previously deeply integrated into the multinational strategic framework in the Middle East, received immediate executive orders to initiate a comprehensive and rapid withdrawal. This singular action sent immediate shockwaves directly into the heart of the Pentagon and Israeli Defense Headquarters. A foundational pillar of the European security apparatus simply turned its back and walked away from the active battlefield. The message radiating from the Italian capital was unmistakable and deeply profound. The government of Italy will absolutely not allow its soldiers to bleed for a catastrophic, unprovoked escalation born entirely of presidential hubris. They categorically refuse to be complicit in a reckless, unilateral crusade that threatens to consume the entire Mediterranean basin in endless conflict. Almost simultaneously, the political theatre in Madrid offered a level of verbal hostility and public condemnation rarely witnessed in modern diplomatic history. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez stood before his nation and directed a blistering, uncompromising verbal assault squarely at the administration in Washington and its closest regional allies. Despite facing severe, back-channel threats of profound economic and political retaliation, he refused to soften his stance. He utilized a devastatingly simple but profoundly accurate metaphor that instantly resonated across global media networks. He stated unequivocally that one cannot purposefully ignite a massive global inferno and subsequently demand international sympathy for the blinding smoke caused by that exact fire. It was a complete, systematic dismantling of the victim narrative desperately being pushed by the architects of the conflict. Yet, the true emotional climax in the Spanish capital erupted directly from the floor of the National Assembly. A deeply furious legislative member seized the microphone, channeling the collective horror and visceral disgust of a watching world. The standard protocol of polite, measured political discourse was abandoned entirely, replaced by raw, piercing grief. The representative screamed into the suddenly silent, cavernous chamber, demanding to know if the grieving mothers of 160 slaughtered young women would ever offer an ounce of gratitude to the American commander-in-chief for the brutal annihilation of their children. The sheer brutality of the question hung in the air like a suffocating weight. The assembly member then turned their blinding rage toward domestic political rivals who still weakly defended the transatlantic alliance, branding them with absolute disgust as pathetic sycophants and bootlickers of a rogue foreign power. The parliamentary chamber instantly descended into absolute pandemonium, the very walls echoing with the deafening sound of a historic alliance tearing itself into unrecognizable pieces. Across the English Channel, the historic House of Commons in London, usually a bastion of measured debate and rigid parliamentary procedure, transformed overnight into a severe tribunal of moral judgment. Parliament member Stephen Flynn stood up and delivered an indictment so severe and so sweeping that it will undoubtedly be recorded in the permanent annals of international history. He did not mince his words or hide behind diplomatic euphemisms. He explicitly branded the entire American-led military campaign as fundamentally and undeniably illegal, describing the rapidly unfolding global fallout as verging on absolute, terrifying insanity. Flynn painted a horrifying, apocalyptic landscape that chilled the blood of every listening delegate in the room. He spoke of a region turned entirely upside down by advanced weaponry, where heavy, toxic crude oil is literally falling from the skies like black rain, poisoning the earth, the water supply, and the innocent populations trapped below. He described subterranean municipal infrastructure failing catastrophically, with urban sewers violently exploding under the immense kinetic pressure of the relentless bombardment, turning dense neighborhood streets into hazardous, unlivable disaster zones. He documented how regional military forces were indiscriminately attacking civilian populations across the entire map, while massive cargo ships faced the terrifying prospect of navigating heavily mined waters. Then, Flynn delivered the most devastating, soul-crushing blow of the entire parliamentary session. He forced the deeply uncomfortable chamber to confront the ultimate, unforgivable human cost of this sanitized, push-button warfare. He directly challenged the British Prime Minister, demanding absolute accountability for the decision to allow American forces to utilize British military installations to launch these catastrophic strikes just days prior. The intense questioning culminated in a singular, horrifying image that human words can barely contain. He spoke of undeniable, verified visual footage showing an American-manufactured Tomahawk cruise missile descending directly onto a civilian primary school. He forced the silent room to internalize the staggering, incomprehensible death toll of 110 innocent children, their fragile lives erased in a blinding flash of advanced targeting technology. He demanded to know how any civilized leader, sitting thousands of miles away in safety, could possibly justify such absolute, unrestrained carnage as a necessary strategic objective. The sheer, overwhelming weight of these coordinated condemnations from Rome, Madrid, and London represents a terminal, unhealable fracture in Western hegemony. This is no longer a mere disagreement over the finer points of foreign policy or resource management. It is a profound, shared moral revulsion. The horrific, undeniable realities of the battlefield have violently stripped away all remaining diplomatic pleasantries. The leaders of the free world are not merely stepping back, They are actively pointing accusatory fingers at the architect of the global chaos. The blood of the innocent is permanently soaking through the geopolitical fabric, and the entire planet is watching a rogue superpower drown in the immense, tragic consequences of its own unchecked aggression. The illusion of unilateral supremacy has completely shattered. A leader who demanded absolute loyalty from the global stage now stands entirely alone. The international community has delivered a brutal lesson in modern diplomacy. You cannot burn down the geopolitical house and expect your neighbors to extinguish the flames. The era of attempting to rule the world through unchecked aggression and sheer arrogance is definitively over. This catastrophic miscalculation proves that acting as a rogue superpower inevitably leads to total diplomatic isolation. What are your thoughts on this unprecedented global rejection? Do you believe these fractured international alliances can ever be repaired, or are we entering a completely new era of divided global power? We really want to hear your personal perspective on this massive shift. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this geopolitical analysis insightful, sharing this broadcast with your friends and family helps spread critical awareness during these incredibly uncertain times. Connect with us across all social media networks to continue this vital conversation. Finally, subscribing to United States News Daily and turning on your notifications ensures you are always informed about the realities shaping our world. Thank you for watching.